This special feature is for video game elements. As you see, I talk about this a lot, but when it comes to a video game, especially Legend of Zelda, Nintendo always puts the gameplay first. So it is one of those things where they have to write the story around the game as opposed to the game around the story. So my idea when I wrote the script was I wrote focus on the story first, then I focus on game elements second, so that way the story wouldn't take a back seat to the game elements and references and stuff like that. So but obviously some story beats had to follow stuff from the video games. So I knew the basic formula was Link starts out in some kind of village. He's an outsider and a nobody. He meets Princess Zelda. There's a threat. He has to find certain items, certain MacGuffins, gets the Master Sword, has to get more MacGuffins, and then defeats Ganon. Some of this was based mostly off of A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time, but I also took inspiration from the Link to the Past comic book. And so this idea, just like those adaptations, instead of making Aghanim the alter ego of Ganon, I made him a separate character. Especially because, keep in mind, as I talk about in the history of writing the fan film, I initially wanted to do a direct adaptation of Ocarina of Time, and I plan on doing that still, but that would just have been too problematic to do, so that's why I wrote this, and I nicknamed it Budget Zelda, because it was a Zelda film I could do on a low budget without having too many issues. And I go into more detail in the writing, but here I'm going to go into detail on the game elements. So you see Link is working with the crops with his friends. Nico glides with the chicken, or the cuckoo, which is something you can do in the game. They have the chicken stampede as a cute little homage to what happens when you attack the chickens. The cuckoos, sorry. I'm going to keep making that mistake over and over again. Link going into the forest tomb with the lantern was not based on something from the game entirely, but based on a story from Shigeru Miyamoto's childhood that inspired the games. Him breaking the vase and finding the rupees, of course, is an homage to what you do in the game, and even Bo makes a reference to how Link has a bad habit of breaking vases. And of course, originally in the forest tomb, there wasn't that much in the original script, so I added a little more. So he had him going down the twisted hallway, and he had to solve a riddle to get through in order to help this Poe ghost. Originally, it was going to be all 4 Poe sisters, but we had to, change that a bit because, it just would have been too much with the budget and the time. And him finding the Triforce of Courage in the treasure chest is just like, getting an item from a treasure chest. And of course, you see Denogen and the "It's dangerous to go alone, take this" line. That kind of speaks for itself. Link traveling through Hyrule Field, of course, is based on what you do in the games. This shot is based on this piece of artwork from the first Zelda game. I definitely had to have that in there. You briefly see the little Picori person giving, some rupees to Link. That's a reference to Minish Cap, because canonically the Picori are the reason why you find those little items hidden in places. The Baga tree was kind of inspired by Old Man Willow in Lord of the Rings, but the tree does not come necessarily from the game, but rather from the Ocarina of Time manga. Link meeting the witches, it's just based on any moment in the game where he meets the witches, and they're based specifically on maple and syrup. And it was kind of inspired by Tom Bombadil having, this tree and having these witches help Link. Link going through the dungeon to save Zelda is very akin to A Link to the Past. You had them getting helped by the Minish people by shrinking down to a smaller size. You have Lon Lon Ranch, and you hear Epona's song. Link saving Impa is based on Link's introduction in the first Zelda game. You have the library, and it plays the famous song that everybody loves. Both of them, when you're inside of a certain area. Link crashing into the shelf to get the Book of Mudora was based on what you do in A Link to the Past. Him holding up the book like this was based off of this. And here's my cameo, Error, based on Zelda 2. He goes to the bottom of the well, and it's reminiscent of the royal family's tomb where you go to get the Hylian shield. And originally he was going to have an encounter with the Redeads, but it just felt like filler in the context of the film, so we removed that. Breach of Demise was borrowed from Breath of the Wild because people theorize that that's where Demise came from, and I mentioned Demise in the mythology of this film, so I felt it was nice and would have added to nice fan theories and stuff like that. Nabooru was supposed to be a character, but she had to be written out, so we referenced her as a mythological figure to at least acknowledge her. Here, Link gets taken to the Dark World without knowing it, and that's a reference to A Link to the Past, because there are certain areas where you could go to enter the Dark World. Some of these puzzles in the Spirit Temple are very reminiscent to different puzzles in the game, especially like the mirror one. That's very akin to the mirror puzzles you have in Ocarina of Time. Here you have them going through the Sacred Grove, which is borrowed from Twilight Princess, but it's based mostly off the Lost Woods from A Link to the Past. The Master Sword speaks for itself. Link flying with the parasol was based off of the hot air balloon scene from the Link to the Past comic book. The fight with Aghanim is based on Dead Man's Volley, especially from A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time. Link fights Goma, which is something that's very common in Zelda games like Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. Link goes to the fairy fountain to heal emotionally, which is based on where you rest and everything. You see Link gets the Epona, and I'm trying to make sure we had a horse that looked enough like Epona. Couldn't get a horse that was completely accurate, but this one was good enough. The intermission, it plays the fairy fountain theme, which I think is nice because it's a nice way, like where you're taking a break. And so here it kind of works in this regard. And you have the Shadow Temple. You have them going through the cemetery, just like in Ocarina of Time. You have the very eerie, haunting Nocturna Shadow playing to open the Shadow Temple, and some of these dynamic shots are based on certain dynamic shots. And even certain shots and zooms are very inspired by the games, especially like the black and white flashbacks. Shadow Temple takes a lot of inspiration from Ocarina of Time. You have the torture chambers, which are based mostly off the bottom of the well.
What is that?
This is where Aghanim used to torture his prisoners.
You have Dead Hands. You have the Wall Master. Here you have the invisible road or the invisible path that they use the Lens of Truth with. The ferry is taken directly from Ocarina of Time. And here you have the encounter with the Redeads, everybody's favorite childhood nightmare fuel aside from Dead Hand. Then this, I talk about this in the lore inclusions, but this is based off of something from Skyward Sword. I'll just mention that briefly because I talk about it in the lore inclusions on this DVD. Death Mountain, its music is based off of that of Link to the Past. You have the Fire Temple, and then the fight with Dodongo, which is from Ocarina of Time. They mentioned Spectacle Rock because that's, a landmark that you see in a lot of Zelda games. And Link mentioned seeing the silver arrow and seeing how that was meant to destroy, that was used to destroy Ganon, because in the first Zelda game, Ganon's base was in Death Mountain, and he even had a base in Death Mountain in the Dark World of Link to the Past, and that's where you have Ganon's tower, playing a role in this. You have the fight with Dark Link, which is inspired by both Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. Like, Dark Link's story arc is based off of the Hero Shade from Twilight Princess. And of course, I forgot to mention the stuff with the kids being kidnapped and then rescued at Kakariko was taken from Twilight Princess. And then Colin standing up for Nico is a reference to Colin saving Ilya, or Colin saving Beth in Twilight Princess. In this film, it was originally going to be more on the nose and have him say Fado, but Liz moved to Florida and we couldn't get her her scenes done, so I changed it. Uncle Bo's death, and of course Uncle Bo is a combination of Link's uncle from A Link to the Past and Mayor Bo from Twilight Princess. His death is based off of the uncle's death in A Link to the Past, but it takes place towards the end because it makes more dramatic sense in the context of the film. And here's an Easter egg I did. You see earlier, Zelda gives Link this heart pendant, and that's kind of like an awkward moment for him because he kind of likes her. When he's thinking about giving up, he looks at this heart pendant, and that gives him some more motivation. So that's a reference to the hearts and the heart pieces in the games, giving you your health back. And then here you have Link having to go through some trials, such as the Invisible Bridge, which is based on some trials that you have to go through in the castle. Especially because in A Link to the Past, you have to fight certain bosses that you already fought in Ganon's tower. And then in Ocarina of Time, you have to go through different trials of the Seven Sages. And so here, Link has to demonstrate everything he's learned to fight all these creatures once again. Aghanim's death is based off of Ganon's death with the silver arrow in the first Zelda and A Link to the Past. Ganon's defeat is based very much on his defeat in Ocarina of Time, where he's stabbed and then imprisoned in the he was imprisoned in the Dark World, but in this one he was imprisoned in the gap between dimensions, because the Dark World gets restored. Ganon's tower falling is taken directly from Ocarina of Time, and also a little nod to the Black Cauldron, which may have inspired Ocarina of Time with that. them touching the Triforce and restoring peace is very much like A Link to the Past. And then even the credits are very much like A Link to the Past. So yeah, those are a lot of the game elements that I incorporated, in this film.